Morning folks, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School, and we've got our fleshing beam here that we've been fleshing off the hides from the animals that we've actually been taking off the trap line, and we've released well over 50% of what we've caught. We're only harvesting what we are going to use, and that's what we did all during the class. Anything we harvested, we ate it, we put up the fur, and part of that utilization of the animal is rendering down some of this fat. And that's what I'm going to show you today. I'm going to collect up a bunch of this fat. We're going to render it down and pour it into a container. We're going to talk about some of the different uses for that rendered fat. Stay with me. All right, so we're going to collect this loose fat that's on this fleshing beam. Don't worry about if it's got a few leaves or sticks or anything like that in it right now. You can take that off later or separate it later. Right now, just get the major chunks of fat in there and the major chunks of leaves and things like that out. Don't worry about the small stuff. Just get the little stuff out. And you can use this to render down, especially if you're using it for non-edibility or medicinal things like that. You can render this down a couple days after the fact. It's not a big deal. Alright, so we have collected all of this into a pot for rendering, and now we're going to just put this over a low fire. We don't want to burn it, but we want to render it down. So we need some heat. About medium heat is what we're looking for. Alright, so we'll get us a fire started, get things warmed up. I got the high flames off to one side until I get things burning real good, and I'll tuck it down in the middle there, so I'm not getting really high flames on the pot itself, and start rendering that down. It's going to take a little while. Now, as this thing's cooking, we're going to want to come in here every once in a while and just kind of stir things around. Starting to already build up some liquid in the bottom of this thing. That's rendered fat. Like I said, this is going to take a little while. I figured I'd give you guys a look where we're at with this. You know, I always tell people, make everything that you carry around with you multifunctional. I've got these trap setters for setting Canterbury traps, and I showed how to make a set of these trap spring setters, but they make a really good grabber for taking pots off of the fire as well. They lock in place, so there's no way that pot's coming out of there unless you want it to. They're pretty heavy, but if you're carrying them in a trap and camp already, you might as well utilize them. So, let's take a look and see where we're at here. Okay, so again, we've got a pretty good amount of liquid in here. I'll give you a close-up of this, but we want to continually move this stuff around as we're rendering it. We're getting about a quarter of a pot of liquid in here now. It takes quite a bit of this stuff to render a good amount of fat. I'll give you a little bit of a close-up look at that, and then we'll get it back on the fire. One of the things I plan to do with this fat is make a fat lamp or just a quick grease lamp. And so I'm just going to take a piece of this jute twine and start to make some reverse wrap 2-ply cordage out of it by figuring out which way they're already twisted and then twisting them in the opposite and over each other. Pretty simple, quick process. I've got a lengthy video on this. And then I can twist this down and then double it over and do the same thing again to get the thickness of wick that I want. But this natural jute material, if you've got some jute twine around your camp or some cotton, anything like that will work as a wick, as well as a lot of natural materials. Different types of funguses, different types of plant piths, cattail fluff. Lots of those things will work as a natural wick. But this will give you a more controllable wick that you can actually dip into the material very much like a candle wick when you're done, and soak it with material and then put it into a wire holder to actually make a pretty nifty little lamp in a small mason jar. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do with this rendered tallow when we get this done. Okay, so we're just going to take a jar. This just happens to be like a mason jelly jar, but it could be any jar we find in the woods. And again, multifunctionality of our gear. We've got our trap line pliers and we've got our trapping wire. So we can utilize that to help make what we want here. And what we want is just a stand that will sit inside. And we can just squeeze that circle down a little bit more, just like that. And then we want this stand to come up inside like this. So if we can press this down just a little bit more, it should kind of spring into the bottom of this jar when we're done, just like that. And then we've got this sticking up, and this is what we're going to attach our wick to. And we're just going to come over here and figure out about where we want it and put a bend in it, just like that. Pull this out. We'll come out here and force this bend over just about like that and squeeze it down till it's pretty close. Come in here and trim off our excess. We've got a little bit of excess wire that we don't need on there. Squeeze this down just a little bit more, just like that, and that's going to be where our wick sits, inside here in the center. So again, if we spring load that down in there, we get this centered up just like this. Now we have a place for our wick, and our wick is going to sit down inside here all the way down in the bottom, just like this. We can coil it up so that we can pull it up through as we use it, and we're going to slide it into that spot that we just made there with our pliers to hold it in the center, just like this. And that's going to give us the body and shape of our lamp. And now we're going to soak this wick really good in tallow before we put it in here, and then we're going to put our tallow inside. And when we're done, we should be able to still put the lid on, because this tallow may not be solidified depending on the time of year, how much heat and things like that. You've got different types of fats that have different consistencies at certain temperatures. Beef tallow stays fairly solid at room temperature. Lard stays fairly solid at room temperature, but the warmer it gets, the softer it gets. Coon tallow is very much like that. The warmer it gets, the softer that stuff's going to get. So having a lid is convenient. You can also use this same material once it gets a little bit solidified. You can mix it with beeswax to make a waterproofing agent for your leather gear, for your canvas haversack, things like that, for reproofing your haversack. You can use it on your boots to help waterproof your boots. Or if you don't have beeswax, you can use it straight melted just like it is right now. Put it on a rag and start scrubbing down your leather with it and work it into the leather, and it will help waterproof it, as well as protecting things like wood handles, knife blades. All those types of things can be dressed with this tallow. So it's a very, very multifunctional item. The lamp is just a bonus to show you that it can be used as a fuel as well. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and put this in the jar, because it'll be easier just to pull that back out of there once we get it soaked with tallow. So we'll just shove it down into the jar all the way for the moment, like this. And then we'll get this jar filled with some tallow. And all we really need to do that is get our container that's still liquefied. We're a little bit warm. Again, with that, utilizing what you have. A pair of pliers works fine for that. Pour that right down in there just like this. We got more than enough to fill up a couple of these. So what we'll do is we'll store some of this in another container, and that will give us that much more versatility and that much more life out of the amount of tallow that we can get from one raccoon or two raccoons. I'd say there's probably a couple raccoons worth of tallow in that bucket right there from this class this weekend. So now that I've got it in there and I've got it soaking the wick, I'm not going to leave it in there until it solidifies, because I don't want that wick to be stuck down there. I got to pull the wick out. So I'll get a stick and fish that out of there in just a second as soon as I'm sure that it's soaked in, and we'll stick it right here in our slit. And we can go ahead and light this lamp up while it's still not solidified, and it'll work just fine. Now when we fish that wick up in there, I just grabbed that loop and just drug it up in between there, just like this, and then pulled it over till it was fairly tight, and then pushed everything else down in, because again, this is going to start to solidify as it cools down. So we'll wait till it gets a little bit more solid, and then I'll show you how it works as a lamp or a candle. Alright, so there's our raccoon tallow candle burning in the wall tent. You can see that the multifunctionality of this stuff is unbelievable, and utilizing the total resource of the animal you harvest is very, very important. That's a nice bright light for your tent, and you have all the other uses, from preservation of metal, wood, leather, and canvas, that you can also use this for as well. So it's a very, very good resource to understand how to, again, harvest, manipulate, and store. Alright guys, well, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School, and I appreciate you joining me today for a video on rendering tallow and some of the uses for raccoon tallow out here on the trap line. I thank you for your support and your views. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, and for our business, for all of our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends, and I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks guys.